My dad is a pastor, and my mom is an organist, which is another way of saying that I spent way too much time in church growing up. Now, I spent a lot of time goofing off or not listening, wondering when we were ever going to get to go home. But I do have pretty vivid memories of every Good Friday. It was one of my favorite services. We would read through the 7 last words of Christ, and in between each verse, as the choir sung, a candle would be extinguished until the entire sanctuary was left in darkness. One of the things I remember most clearly about this service was when the words were spoken, "It is finished." See, I knew that meant that it was almost time to go home. It is finished. The service is almost over. It is finished. I get to watch Saturday morning cartoons tomorrow. It is finished. 2 more days till that Easter basket full of candy. It is finished. Now, I realize in hindsight that perhaps this was a bit of an oversimplistic interpretation of this verse. Perhaps I was coming to the text with my own agenda. Perhaps I didn't fully grasp the power of these words. But it also strikes me, the more that I look at these words, that it's quite likely that the disciples didn't fully understand these last words spoken by Christ either. For those who believed that Jesus was their long-awaited Messiah, the one who had come to restore Israel, his words, "It is finished," may have been heard as the words of shattered hopes. I've tried. It's over. It is finished. For the beloved disciple or his mother that stood at the foot of the cross, "It is finished," may have been heard with some relief as the end to Jesus' physical pain. Thank God, finally, it is finished. For those who conspired to have him arrested and sentenced to death, "It is finished" must have been heard as his cry of final defeat. I have lost. You've won. It is finished. But what did Jesus really mean when he spoke these words on the cross? Let's listen closely to this text in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 30. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. This is the word of the Lord. Now, only John's Gospel records this phrase, "It is finished," as Jesus' final word spoken from the cross. The 3 other Gospels speak of a loud cry that Jesus utters at his final moments. But only John tells us what this cry was. So we may want to ask ourselves, why did John find it so important to report these as Jesus' last words? And why were these the last words that Jesus spoke before he gave up his life? Now, the original Greek text reads tetelestai, and it doesn't translate simply into English, so we have to create a phrase out of it. It is finished. But still, some of the power is lost in this translation. If you look up the word tetelestai in a Greek lexicon, you'll actually find 3 meanings of this word. The first is to finish or to complete, as it's normally translated here. The second is to fulfill or to accomplish. And the third is to pay what is due, or to pay in full. 3 very different meanings if you think about it. So which one did Jesus mean? Well, the thing that I love about John's Gospel is that you can never translate anything simply or in one dimension in his text. If a word has multiple meanings, then chances are John wanted his readers to stop and ask, what did he really mean? If a word has multiple meanings, then chances are each meaning has something to teach us about Jesus. These multiple meanings are multiple layers that tell us just how wide and long and high and deep is the story of Jesus in John's multi-dimensional gospel. So if we read, "It is finished," and think we have to narrow it down to just one of three definitions, then we're going to miss the richness of the many reasons why Jesus died on the cross. Instead, if we are going to really understand what Jesus was saying in his final breath, then we need to look at all of these meanings. It is complete. It is accomplished. It is paid in full. And we need to ask ourselves, what was complete? What was accomplished? What was paid in full? And what does all of this mean for us? So what was completed when Jesus spoke these final words? In John's prologue, we're told that the Word became flesh and lived among us. Jesus moved into the neighborhood, as Eugene Peterson puts it. And so from birth to death, Jesus was on a mission to reveal God to us. From the time he was born in a manger until the time he was crucified on the cross, Jesus was on a mission to give us direct access to God. This is precisely why the curtain is torn at the moment of Jesus' death. There's no longer a veil between us and God. This is precisely why Paul, when he preaches at Mars Hill, tells the Athenians that the unknown God they worship can be known to them through Christ. This is why we today can tell those who long for God, no matter where they are in their spiritual journey, that the God they hunger for can be known through Jesus Christ. It is finished. It is complete. Jesus is the full revelation of God. Now, there were many years when I did not believe this at all. Being a good pastor's kid, meaning a rebellious one, I spent a lot of years rejecting Christianity and exploring all kinds of other religions. In college, I read all the major religious texts of Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and Islam. For a time, I meditated at a Tibetan Buddhist monastery. I lived in South Africa, and I became fascinated by Rastafarianism and other Afrocentric spiritualities there. But eventually, I got tired of worrying which version of the creation story had it right, which version of the afterlife I should really believe in. And so I decided that God was simply too abstract, too removed, and too mysterious for humans to ever really understand. Well, it's hard to describe the many transformations of mind and heart that eventually brought me back to Christ. But needless to say, I am standing here today because Jesus showed up in my life. Jesus showed up and revealed the fullness of God to me. And what I discovered in that journey was what I had been missing in my spiritual quest apart from Christ. See, for so many other religions, God is an abstraction. God, if you can even call God that, is an energy or a life force or an idea that is so far removed from humans. But through Jesus, God is so incredibly personal and accessible and tangible. Through Jesus, we relate to God as a person who has gone through all of the same temptations that we have gone through. We relate to a person who has felt all of the same emotions that we feel. A God who has come to live among us and take on all of the heartbreak and the pain and the fallenness of this world. So it is finished. God's revelation is finished and is completed in the person of Jesus. But what about the second meaning of totality?